Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Wednesday, June 25th, 2025, and on Wednesdays we talk about emotional well-being and relationships. And this week's theme in general is the issue of peace. And on Sunday's vlog, I talked about peace specifically in relation to the purpose and meaning of life, mainly just from my own philosophical perspective. But that also clearly relates to how we find peace in our lives, in our emotional well-being, and how we establish healthier relationships in general. I mentioned that while obviously there are folks out there who are unhappy with their lives for a variety of reasons, the vast majority of us are trying to be happy, would certainly still choose life, over death or some other alternative. And at some level, don't most of us, if not all of us, want to have reasonably healthy and meaningful and satisfying lives? So why don't we? That's the question. Well, the overarching reason, in my view at least, is that most of us actually end up being trapped, shall we say, not just in our own bodies at times, if you will. Our bodies are acting up, they're not behaving the way that we think that they should, or we have certain health issues and so on. So yes, we have to continually look after ourselves physically, or the second law of thermodynamics inevitably takes over and we just fall apart. But even more problematic, potentially, is that we're trapped in our own minds as well. But wait, isn't that a good thing? Sure, it can be. At the same time, don't we sometimes need a second opinion? Or do you only prefer the opinions that show up in your head? And what if those opinions that you have in your head are perhaps wrong? Is that possible? Or disturbed or unhealthy by some metric? Therein lies a bit of a catch-22. We're stuck in our minds. And so then how do we decide if we're actually then ultimately right about things or have a healthy view of the world? Can we just assume that to be the case? Or if that's our opinion, we can just always conclude, well, obviously I'm right because otherwise I'd change my view. Or laziest of all, we'll just say, well, it's just my opinion and everyone's entitled to their opinion. Of course. But then perhaps that leaves us sometimes in a bad place, or the wrong place, or an unhealthy place. And we don't even necessarily then realize it. I'll give you a very recent, real personal example. I was bothered by something that was kind of happening not far from where I live, and I was concerned about someone else's behavior. I won't get into the details, but I was allowing my concerns then to have an adverse impact on my own thinking and well-being. And I finally turned to my wife and I said something like, I'm not happy with how I'm thinking about this situation. I don't know exactly why, but I think I'm wrong about how I'm viewing things. Okay? So in other words, in short, I kind of just said, I don't like my thinking. Does that make any sense? And again, when I say I'm asking that of you, the viewer or the listener, does that make sense? Has that ever happened to you? But I also then had a nice conversation with my lovely and thoughtful wife. And we just took 5 or 10 minutes to examine the issue, what I was thinking, why I was thinking about it that way. And also I learned my wife's view of the situation, of course. And it really didn't take all that long, but I quickly realized then the problem with my own thinking. And I just as quickly started to think differently about the whole situation. And that was about a week ago. And boy, what a difference. The net result is I found peace in my heart, where my heart had previously been troubled. And that was just from how I was thinking about things. So more broadly, I had to accept that my thinking was flawed, or at least troublesome, and creating the disturbance in the force, the disturbance that I was feeling. Sure, Dr. J, that's why so many people get therapy, obviously, and so many more should be getting some kind of counseling. But I'm not even talking about the long-term therapy that people need to deal with maybe a lifetime of trauma or deeply disturbed patterns of psychological reasoning and processing. I'm just talking about how we think and process information about everyday situations, our countless interactions with other people, that sort of thing. You don't need a therapist necessarily for much of our everyday stuff. You might just need a trusted and wise second opinion. So it's kind of like being a good parent, if you will, with your adult children, or your younger children for that matter. So our 5 boys really don't need me to tell them how to think or to feel or how to live their lives. But even as well adjusted as they generally are, that doesn't mean that they don't need some advice or a second opinion from hopefully a wise and helpful father or stepfather, or a wise and helpful mother or stepmother. And as a general principle, if you find yourself upset about something at work, something that's happening in your life, something that's happening with another person or in a relationship, my advice would be to first try to take a step back. And I know this is tough, but the issue is, what can you do and what can you control? And so you and your reaction and your thinking is the simple answer. So start with that. So is it actually you? Are you the problem? Or is it your thinking specifically? Is it your interpretation of things that's the problem? And or do you have some limited or even flawed information about the situation? So you don't have to be the Buddha or the world's most accomplished Stoic to realize that you do have, at least potentially, a great deal of control over yourself and your thinking. And that means you can also change your thinking if you're humble enough and willing enough to take a good, hard look at yourself. So imagine, for example, that you're waiting to be picked up after a long day at work, and your partner or your ride doesn't show up on time. It happens. And then after a few minutes, say after 10 minutes, you decide you better give them a call. Maybe, to see what's happening, try to find out. But there's no answer to your call. So you don't know what's happening. You're quite tired. You might be hungry, whatever. And you're already stressed, maybe even exhausted from your long day of work. So what's the one thing specifically that you can control in that situation? Your reaction, especially your thinking about the situation. What happens is that we tend to create far more drama and even trauma in our own lives based on how we think about things. And we're often our own worst enemies in this regard. And precisely, when we're most tired and hungry and vulnerable. So, as we're waiting for that ride to come, we often tend to allow ourselves to travel down one of two equally unhealthy pathways, at least in our minds. The easiest path of all, we'll be frustrated and maybe even angry with the person who's supposed to be giving us the ride. Why aren't they here? Why are they always late? What's wrong with them? Why are they so inconsiderate? And so on. Or there's what I call the catastrophe reaction, or the OMG reaction. What if they've gotten in an accident? What if they're dead? Right? Or we'll concoct some fantastical story about why they're not here and why they're not answering their phones. But of course, there's always at least a third way of thinking about the whole situation. Non-thinking, for example, or focusing our attention elsewhere, or perhaps then at some point engaging in some kind of problem solving. So non-thinking is just allowing yourself to be. Not worry about what's happening, just enjoying every moment that you're breathing and relaxing and taking in the experience wherever you are. Or you can focus or refocus your energies on some music or the flowers or whatever else you might like to look at with those extra, or do with those extra minutes that you've now been afforded as you're waiting. So wouldn't these be healthier responses and bring you greater peace? Most of the time, yeah. And finally, at some point, I realized you might have to consider the situation and then take some action, especially if it's been a while, it's been a half an hour and no one's showing up. You might have to take matters into your own hand, much like I did when I was about 4 years old. I was exactly 4 years old. I remember this quite well. And so at age, well, I'll tell you what happened. Basically, my sisters, I had two older sisters, three older brothers, but in this case, it was just my two older sisters. And the one sister was having a birthday party and had a bunch of her little friends over. So I'm 4, my sisters are 6 and 7, and their friends are roughly the same age. So my mother took us in the old station wagon, all of us kids, all of her, herself, all the girls, half a dozen, 7 or 8 girls, and then myself, flopping around in the back of the stake, no seatbelts, that sort of thing. And we go to the bowling alley. Great. We're going to celebrate the birthday there. And the kids are going to play the little duck pin. We call them duck pins. They were going to go duck pin bowling. And I was just a little bit younger, and I wasn't inclined to even want to try the bowling. So I asked my mom, can I go to the little arcade there and look at the people playing the pinball machines and that sort of thing? She said, sure, great. So the girls were having their little, bowling party, and I was in seventh heaven. I went over there and I was looking up at the pinball machines, and I just was fascinated by all the flashing bells and whistles and everything that was happening. And I just got lost in that whole experience. It was great. Now, the problem is that after, I don't know how long, obviously, I was there, but at some point I thought, oh, maybe I better go back and see what's happening. So I went back to see what was going on. This has actually been quite a while, and they weren't there. So I thought, oh, where is everybody? So I walked outside to the parking lot, and again, I remember exactly where we parked. The station wagon was gone. So my mom was gone, the girls were gone, and there I was, this 4-year-old, left alone at the bowling alley. And so at age 4, I didn't exactly have that Zen-like calm yet, or that being in nothingness approach, shall we say, to just stand there and wait, and just to maybe enjoy the forest or the creek that were across the street. And in 1966, this is when this was, I didn't have an iPhone or earbuds or even a transistor radio to distract me. And so at age 4, I went with option number 3, problem-solving mode. That is, time to take matters into my own hands. And so my 4-year-old brain was telling me at least 2 things, both of which were not necessarily correct. First thing my little brain was telling me was, well, they've obviously forgotten me, so they're not necessarily coming back. Again, that's not necessarily true, but that's what I was thinking. And second, you're all alone in this effing world, so you're going to have to get home yourself. And I don't think I thought exactly that, and I didn't use the F word in my mind, but nonetheless, and that also wasn't necessarily true. So what was the solution that my 4-year-old brain concocted? True story, by the way. So, well, as I mentioned, this was 1966. And so I thought about what I'd seen a lot of people doing when we were out driving around. And so I decided to do the same thing that other people were doing. That is, I went to the side of the road, specifically heading in the same direction as my home, and I stood by the side of the road and I stuck my thumb out. True story. And yeah, I tried hitchhiking. And boy, did that work. Because almost immediately, a guy in an old pickup truck stopped, pulled over to pick me up. Now, don't worry, it's all good. No horror stories here. Really nice guy and all that. He said something like, I don't remember exactly, but something like, hey, little fellow, what you doing? Where you going? Nice guy. And so I explained the situation as best I could. And, my 4-year-old explanation, they left me, my mom left, and I got to go home, or whatever it was I said, something along those lines. And so he volunteered then to take me home. Now, I didn't know the names of the streets. I wasn't reading them. I didn't have that memorized, but I have a really good visual memory. So if you're ever out on hiking somewhere or you're lost, I'm a good person to have with you in that sense. So I have a really good kind of visual sense of where I am. And I was able to sort of point to him the directions. You know, yeah, now you got to go here, now you got to go there, right? And no problem. So we got home, and all good. Now, when we got home, it was funny because my father was now out on the lawn, and there was a police car there. So things had progressed, and I didn't know what was going on. But apparently, what had happened is that my mother realized that she had, they got back home and with the girls, they realized that I wasn't with them. And so two things happened. She went racing back to the bowling alley. So I should have just stayed there in that sense. And secondly, they'd called the police. They didn't know what had happened exactly. So the police were there. My dad was there. The guy, as I said, he dropped me off, no problem, explanation, all good. And then, of course, my mom finally, got back and realized what had happened. Everybody was embarrassed and shocked and, all those other things. But it all worked out fine. So here's the thing, though, right? So at least at that moment in my 4-year-old life, I didn't panic. Right? I did allow some thoughts to intrude that weren't necessarily correct, but at least I adopted a problem-solving approach to my conundrum. And so if I can do that at 4, you could do that at 24 or 34 or 64 or whatever you are, okay? And believe it or not, I actually wasn't scared. I do remember this. I remember how I felt at the time. I was, if you will, I was at peace, if you will, with my decision to hitchhike. And even, dare I say, a little bit proud of myself and my resourcefulness and my resilience, although I'm quite certain I didn't have those words in my vocabulary at that time. And even more remarkably, in some ways, I was a bit Zen-like, right? That is, in terms of kind of accepting my fate and circumstances without getting upset. And I really wasn't upset. That's what I do remember. I wasn't mad at my mom or my sisters or anybody else. I just figured they forgot. And that was true. It was just an accident. They forgot. And so I went into this, as I say, into the problem-solving mode, rather than thinking about how unfair life is, or how horrible those people are, and how they don't love me, or how God wants to punish me. Think of all these horrible things that you might concoct in your own mind. Thankfully, I didn't have any of those thoughts. All those thoughts came later as I grew up. No. But I didn't have them certainly then at 4. So in some ways, I think I might have been better off just for the rest of my life thinking like a 4-year-old or that 4-year-old. And then I could write a bestseller. All I really need to know I learned before kindergarten. I hadn't gone to kindergarten yet. So move over, Robert Fulgham. I'm going to update your 1986 book with the new title 4 decades later and publish this new version in 2026. So the broad lesson for today then gets back literally to how we think about things. We want peace in our lives and in our hearts. The best place to start is with yourself and work from there first. Look at life in some ways through the eyes of the 4-year-old child that we all were, with openness and wonder and possibility. And look at life as a journey of perpetual learning and discovery. And as with our physical bodies and physical selves, we have to take care of our minds and our mental selves, both cognitively and emotionally. What nourishment do we need, and what are we missing? What are the problem areas that we need to work on, areas that we need to strengthen? And by the same token, what are our emotional and mental strengths? What are we really good at? And put it all together, and you can allow yourself, even compel yourself, to continue to learn and continue to stay as healthy as you can mentally. Change your thoughts or your patterns of behavior that are taking you down unhealthy pathways. And if you can redirect your energies accordingly, you'll find yourself becoming not only a healthier person, but a more peaceful person, or a person more at peace and never give up. It took me about 55 years, I'm not kidding, to finally turn the proverbial corner and reach a truly more enlightened and peaceful approach to life. And I'm still learning, as per my earlier anecdote about how I didn't like how I was thinking about this recent situation. And so I changed. And there are still more changes that lie ahead, but I feel truly blessed. I'm no longer the angry, hyper-competitive a-hole that I sometimes allowed myself to be, certainly when I wore a younger man's clothes. Thank you, Billy Joel. But even after the age of 25, I had to spend about 3 more decades fighting mostly with myself, right? With my own inner demons and with aspects of my personality and thinking that just weren't optimal or healthy, shall we say. True inner peace, then, required that I make a lot of changes, real changes. I still have a few more to make, but man, what a difference. I never honestly realized what life could be like if you could be truly and deeply at peace with yourself and your place in the world. But you can be. Trust me. If I can be at peace, almost anybody else can too. It just takes a lot more work for some of us than for others. Okay, that's it for today. So, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts and dole out hugs in abundance. Then tomorrow, we're going to take a much deeper scientific look at the issues of peace. All right, until then, take care. We'll see you soon.